And if you can read the mission statement, welcome everyone. Go ahead.
I will. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Helping Parents Heal is a nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting bereaved parents to become shining light parents by providing support and resources to aid in the healing process. We go a step beyond other groups by allowing the open discussion of spiritual experiences and evidence for the afterlife in a non-dogmatic way. Affiliate groups welcome everyone regardless of religious or non-religious background, and we allow for open dialogue. Attendance today at the Helping Parents Heal meeting is voluntary, and we are here for the benefit of learning from and sharing with other parents whose children have passed away. It is understood that our discussions are intended to be confidential and are not designed to replace traditional therapy or spiritual counseling. Helping Parents Heal offers a wide variety of speakers to allow parents to be informed about many possible ways to heal, to connect with their children, and to learn about the afterlife. The views expressed by our guests do not necessarily reflect those of Helping Parents Heal, and we ask that you take from our presentations whatever may benefit you personally.
Thank you, Brian. And I'm going to go ahead and read the very short bios of both Dr. Eben Alexander and Karen Newell. And I just want you to know, everyone who's attending tonight, we're going to be recording this meeting and we'll put it on YouTube so that you'll be able to go back to it as well, which is wonderful. So I'm very, very grateful that they're both here, and I'll quickly read through this and we'll get started. Eben Alexander, MD, was an academic neurosurgeon for over 25 years, including 15 years at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, Children's Hospital, and Harvard Medical School in Boston. He has a passionate interest in physics and cosmology. He is the author of the New York Times #1 bestseller, Proof of Heaven, The Map of Heaven, and Living in a Mindful Universe. To learn more about him, Dr. Alexander, please visit his website at www.ebenalexander.com, which I think Brian's already typed into the sidebar. Karen Newell has spent a lifetime seeking wisdom through esoteric teachings and firsthand experience exploring realms of consciousness. She empowers others by demonstrating how to connect to inner guidance, achieve inspiration, improve wellness, and develop intuition. She is co-founder of Sacred Acoustics and co-author with Dr. Eben Alexander of Living in a Mindful Universe. Learn more about Karen at her website, www.sacredacoustics.com. And maybe, Brian, you could put that into the sidebar. But without further ado, please welcome Karen Newell and Eben Alexander, and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Brian. We're very happy to be here. We were very much looking forward to the in-person conference, and of course now so many of us have changed to reaching each other through these Zoom conferences, so we're happy to do this. It's wonderful to be able to connect this way, and of course in this time, many of us are missing, in my case, many of us are missing our loved ones. And in my case, it's my grandson especially and my daughter, but just not having him with me, I really feel that angst. And of course, all of you parents who have lost your children a little more permanently, now the rest of us can kind of understand a little better what that feels like. But what we're learning is that we can connect to each other through a soul level. Even though I can't be with my 2-year-old grandson now, I can feel him, and we can connect on that level in a beautiful way. It's the binding force of love that connects us all. And what it's connecting is our souls. And so whether we have a physical body or not, our souls are still available for connection through this binding force of love. And towards the end of our hour together, we'll be doing a guided meditation where we can go through a process to do just that. But we're going to start with speaking about some concepts and really getting some foundation for what we're going to experience a little later. And Eben will start us off.
Hello, and I want to join in the thanks here. We're very grateful to have this opportunity to be with you all. We were certainly very excited about the Charleston meeting. That part of the country is very near and dear to us with a lot of family and all, but unfortunately the COVID virus has something else in mind. So, but the good news is we can certainly connect this way. And that's a real, I'm very grateful for that opportunity. I'd like to start by sharing a little bit, about my original story. And I think probably a lot of people in this group may have heard of Proof of Heaven, but some of you may have not. And that was really my telling of what happened to me in 2008. Very profound shift in my thinking and understanding. I had spent, the first 54 years of my life honing a very scientific worldview, was teaching neurosurgery, 15 years at Harvard Medical School and at other institutions. Thought I had a pretty good idea about brain, mind, and consciousness. As much as I wanted to believe a lot of the religious teachings I'd acquired in a Methodist church when I grew up in North Carolina, I struggled a lot through some of my neurosurgical career because I wasn't sure exactly how conscious awareness could survive the death of the brain and body. And I got a masterclass lesson in how that can occur in November 2008. And of course, that's the story that I tell in the book Proof of Heaven. But it has everything to do with a severe gram-negative bacterial meningoencephalitis that drove me deep into coma within about 3 hours of symptom onset, left me in coma for a week. The doctors who took care of me realized very early on that I had a severe case of meningitis and put me on 3 powerful intravenous antibiotics. I was deep in coma from the, even before arriving in the emergency room, and then spent that week in coma, having an incredibly rich spiritual journey that I tell in the book Proof of Heaven. The most important parts of that journey, I think, are the message I received from my beautiful guardian angel on that butterfly wing. And that beautiful message was very simple, but I believe it was the main message I was to bring back to this world. You are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You will be taken care of. And of course, the biggest shock at all, especially as I recovered from all this, and it's important to point out that the meningitis was so severe that I was very amnesic through much of the experience, which I think was part of the lessons that I was to learn. I had to be amnesic. I had to have forgotten all about my earthly experience and be kind of on an empty slate. And that's where so many of these lessons were so rich. But the beautiful thing about it is that what I came to realize in my medical records afterwards, and they've now been reviewed, and there's a case report in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease it came out in September of 2018. And the important thing to point out is that I shouldn't have had any experience at all. This is something I knew. That's why I wrote the book Proof of Heaven. But this medical case report confirms and in fact strengthens the case for just how ill I was, how I should have had no experience at all if you believe that the brain creates consciousness. But that is where the scientific world is going, is a strong realization that our brain does not create consciousness at all. It serves as a filter, reducing valve. That allows primordial consciousness in. But this is an extraordinary difference in what to expect about an afterlife. And this, of course, is why I wrote the book Proof of Heaven. But when I wrote that book, it was more of a question mark than anything. I was acknowledging, millions of people have had near-death experiences. There are tens of thousands of reports out on the internet. Thousands of these cases have been studied over literally thousands of years. It's just astonishing what they represent. Now, of course, near-death experiences in and of themselves will never absolutely prove the afterlife because those people don't die. They come back to this world. But you really have to ask yourself, why is it that we would have these incredible, rich, ultra-real scenes that we see? At the time of death. And especially for me, I think one of the reasons that my case is so interesting to the scientific community is because of the documented damage to my neocortex. I mean, literally, when you read that case report and go through the medical records, it's crystal clear that my neocortex was fully involved in this. And according to modern neuroscience, every bit of our detailed conscious awareness is due to that neocortex. And yet what my journey and so many other journeys have suggested is no, the brain is not the creator of consciousness at all. In fact, when we die, it's like our consciousness expands. We become much more aware. That's why so many near-death experiences report encountering the souls of departed loved ones who were there to escort them over. And of course, the interesting thing about those visions and seeing those loved ones is they often appear at kind of an ideal age. So for example, in meditation, I tell the story of encountering my father after my near-death experience. I hope we're still on. Our video just did something odd. Okay, I guess we're still there.
Sorry about that. Someone shared the screen.
Wow, that was interesting. Sorry, folks. But anyway, I think the important thing to point out is that the modern neuroscience of consciousness and philosophy of mind is really going in a very astonishing direction that not only reveals the reality of an afterlife and that our souls continue to exist after the death of the body, but that in fact, reincarnation is a huge part of the picture. I mean, there's tremendous scientific evidence supporting reincarnation. That is mainly the work of Ian Stevenson and Dr. Jim Tucker. If you're interested in learning more about that scientific evidence, I would encourage you to visit uvadops.org. That's University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, but just the letters uvadops.org, and you'll find a tremendous amount of information there. This is stuff I was not at all aware of before my coma. But my coma journey showed me very clearly, especially when I realized the infinite loving power of that God force that I encountered and so many others have encountered in these experiences. It's why we come back having no fear of death, because we realize it's not the end. And I think that that voice to me, what an incredibly rich and beautiful kind of awakening that was, but it's something that I've gone on to develop through meditation. I continue to return to my NDE. I meditate. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it's a beautiful way to connect, to traverse that veil that separates us from the spiritual realm. Now, in my near-death journey, it was very clear to me that that our souls are eternal, and it was especially important to get that beautiful message from my guardian angel. I came back from the entire experience realizing that hardships, and certainly as a physician, that would include illness and injury, these are actually gifts. And it's very hard for us to appreciate that hardships in our life, and that certainly would include the loss of a child or a loved one. It's very hard when we're trying to live through that to see any kind of silver lining or think there could be any possible gift from it. And yet what I've come to realize is that so many things in my life, and that includes episodes of loss, have in many ways helped my soul to grow, and they have strengthened me and helped me to grow more fully into the soul I came here to be. Now, I think an important thing to point out about my entire journey is after my coma, it took about 2 months for all my neuroscience knowledge to come back to me. And as it did, initially I thought, well, all of that had to be way too real to be real. So to me, it seemed like it had to be some kind of vast hallucination. But that was before I started going through my medical records and having this return of my scientific knowledge, because I started realizing there was no way that that brain had anything more than a primitive little kind of murky existence, as opposed to the extraordinarily rich, ultra-real, vibrant, and much more real than this world experience that I had in those spiritual realms. And that was just a tremendous shock to me. In fact, so many people think that a near-death experience is kind of a vague or dreamy little thing. But in fact, as most near-death experiences will tell you, this world is vague and dreamy. In fact, that world is far more sharp, crisp, vivid, alive, vibrant, and meaningful than this world. So it's extraordinary. It's like Plato's world of ideals, but for the individual soul on their journey. And especially when you realize the importance of understanding reincarnation and all this, you start to see how our life here, or our existence as souls, is not limited to one little incarnation. In fact, you could never achieve the full growth of the soul in one physical lifetime. And that's why it's so important to see this much grander vision for our existence and our connectedness with other souls. Because the other thing I saw, not only the importance of hardships and how they are often the gifts that mark a pathway for us to grow and learn and teach, but also they really help in our ability to connect with other souls. And in fact, what I came to see is it's the only important thing in this universe really is our relationships as sentient beings. And I would say that this modern evolution of the view of reality that's emerging in scientific circles is one that sees consciousness as fundamental. And not only that, but that we are sharing that one consciousness. I would say that that one consciousness, of course, has its origin, as near-death experiencers will attest, in that infinitely loving God force at the core of all reality. And one thing I didn't expect, given my Methodist upbringing, was that in the experience, that in the deepest aspects of my journey, which began in a primitive, course, earthworm's eye view, but then ascended up through a portal of light into a brilliant ultra-real gateway valley that had a lot of Earth-like features, but beautiful waterfalls, into sparkling pools and lush plant life, blossoms, buds, flowers all blooming, incredibly rich, no sign of any death or decay. I mean, what an absolutely beautiful realm. And below me, I was a speck of awareness on this butterfly wing, but below me in this meadow that was so lush with life were thousands of souls dancing. And when I wrote it all up weeks later, I said there were souls between lives, but there was tremendous joy and merriment. And I have a very vivid memory of dogs jumping and children playing. It was just an incredible festivity, all being fueled because up above were these swooping orbs of angelic choirs. And they were emanating down chants and anthems and hymns that would just thunder through me with this incredible majesty and awe of love, of compassion, of kindness. That was a true home, a spiritual home. And that, I believe, is the realm that all of our souls go through when we leave this physical world. It's a realm of indescribable beauty. But of course, it's also associated with that life review. Life reviews have been discussed going back thousands of years in near-death experiences. Plato wrote about a life review in an Armenian soldier, killed in battle. But the most important thing to note about the life review is most people who experience them talk about how the experience is one of witnessing the main events of your life that still have residual lessons to teach you. But you experience them as the emotional power of people around you who were impacted by the various actions and thoughts that you had in this world. So you don't experience the life review from your own point of view as much as from those who are around you. In many ways, the life review shows that this kind of myth that we're a self and we have our own little thoughts inside this brain and it's all ours is not really so true. And that's why when we encounter souls of departed loved ones, it's so beautiful in that realm. They often appear at an ideal age. So for example, when in meditation I encountered my father's soul there, he had passed over at the age of 91. He had been very physically active his whole life. So he had a lot of joint pain and discomfort at the end of his life. But when I saw him in my meditations in this afterlife, he was beautiful and young. He was in his early 20s. And likewise, if a young child passes over, sometimes they'll appear older, like teens or early 20s, kind of an ideal age, and not necessarily the age they were when they passed. So we have to be aware of this fact that that's kind of a world of ideals. But the beautiful thing about my journey, when I came back to this world, initially I was amazed by the whole experience. And of course, before I knew the medical details, I was trying to just explain it as some amazing hallucination induced by meningitis. But when I reviewed the medical records, I realized my brain couldn't have such a hallucination or dream or drug effect. The neocortex was completely involved in this meningitis. And that is why it is such a gift to the scientific community and why they take my story so seriously, because it is very strong evidence for the reality that our consciousness is not created by our brain at all. and that in fact consciousness is something that seems to be more primordial in the universe. When I say that, I mean it's an original kind of constituent of this universe, is that mental layer, that conscious layer, and that is something that humans claim to own because we have this unique relationship with consciousness. But the interesting thing is when you leave your brain and body, you realize your consciousness is much bigger than you ever knew before, and that it connects with those souls of those who have left, that it connects with the universe, with that God force of pure love, which has infinite power to heal. And this is why this kind of awareness is so important for our world. It's why prayer and meditation are so important, because prayer and meditation are beautiful opportunities to go within. And as we realize that our mind and consciousness is not created by our physical brain, but it's something that's much more connected to the universe at large, then we can see the value of going within. And this is why Karen and I have taken a lot of our work with sacred acoustics and with meditative play shops to groups like the International Association of Near-Death Studies, because we like helping people to traverse that veil, get into that one mind, reunite with those souls in prayer and meditation. There are many ways that we can do this, and that's something that Karen and I talk about a lot, and you can learn a lot more if you go to ebenalexander.com or to sacredacoustics.com. But certainly we'd like to share a lot of that here and now. Another important thing to point out is in the months after my coma, as I was putting all the pieces together and realizing what an extraordinary journey I'd been on, and not just that, but how shocking my full recovery was, because that really defies all of Western medical science, the fact that I could come back from that illness. And that's a point that the doctors who wrote the case report in the Journal of Nervous Mental Disease in September 28 make very clear, that my survival was very unexpected. In fact, they make the point when asked by the peer reviewers, how do you explain this miraculous healing? They said it was due to the spiritual content of my near-death experience. And I think that's a very important point because it shows us the reality of understanding our spiritual nature. You know, in many ways, the medical profession has admitted the power of belief and the power of mind over matter for more than 6 decades through the use of placebo effect as the gold standard by which they assess any new treatment, any new medicine, many new procedures can be compared with a placebo control. And that's because the medical profession acknowledges that a patient has tremendous ability to use their beliefs to heal. And this is not only important in our physical health, but in our mental and spiritual and emotional health. And this has to do especially with when we have a severe loss, losing a loved one. And for me, the most difficult example of that is losing a child, because that violates the natural order of things to where our children survive us. And so our hearts go out to each and every one of you for your loss. Now, another important thing to point about the aftermath of my NDE, initially I was going to write a neuroscientific report to talk about the failures of our notions of brain creates consciousness. But then, of course, the more I got into this and started talking about it, and this includes conversations I had with family and friends in where I lived at the time in Lynchburg, Virginia, which is where my coma had happened. And in fact, when I would talk with some of the families in our neighborhood and in our town who had lost children, word got around that they were very comforted by hearing my story of my near-death experience and my kind of spiritual awakening and the scientific basis for all of it. And in fact, that is the reason that I even started giving talks about my experience, was because of the fact that several of those families who had lost children in our community gained tremendous benefit from hearing my story. So I would say that you know, helping parents heal has always been a driving force for me ever since coming back from my coma experience. I would also like to point out that not only is there the notion of reincarnation that we've talked about and the scientific evidence for it, but also very important to point out that there's a whole field of transpersonal psychology This is thanks to the work of brilliant clinical investigators like Dr. Stan Groff, Dr. Michael Newton, Dr. Brian Weiss, and others who discovered that in their patients, people who would have memories of past lives, either uncovered through hypnotic regression or in dreams or what have you, ended up figuring out much more about why they had issues in this life. And so transpersonal psychology simply acknowledges that we've all been here before, our souls are deeply interconnected, and that the best way to address challenges in this lifetime, and that could certainly include the loss of a child, would be to realize that we've been here before, we're in this soul group to learn and teach each other, we'll be back again. So that those that we think are lost from this physical lifetime are not really lost at all. And of course, there are other ways we can communicate with them. I will talk about that in my second session here tonight. But for this moment, what I'd like to do is just leave you with this beautiful thought of the one mind that I've come to realize that we're all sharing that one consciousness, that God consciousness, the very source of our awareness. But for me, in trying to interpret all this and make sense of it after my coma, I was greatly blessed in November of 2011. That's when I met my life partner, co-author of the third book, Living in a Mindful Universe, Karen Newell. And it's because Karen, she taught me many things as a spiritual master and seeker. But I think most importantly, she helped me to realize it's not really about one mind, but it's more about a heart consciousness. And it is about our connectedness through love and those deeply beautiful emotional feelings of connectedness we share with souls very dear to us. And those beautiful connections do not end with the death of the physical body. So Karen?
Thank you. So yes, love. Love is that thing that so many philosophers and people who have had these deep kinds of experiences come to realize is the most important thing in our world. Often that happens when we end up with a terminal diagnosis or a loved one is on their deathbed. We start to notice that love, and we especially notice it when they leave us. And sometimes we don't realize that maybe we haven't demonstrated that love as much until after they're gone. And so for me, I really wanted to understand love from a perspective of the here and now without having to suffer such loss. And so I was driven to learn really how did all of that work. And you can't read about love. You read about love and it's just not enough. It doesn't really explain it to me. There's Rumi and all of these poets who like to talk about it, but love is one of those ineffable things. You just can't find words to describe it, I've discovered. Similar to what happens when people come back from a near-death experience. Very challenging to find words to describe that angst, that feeling of wanting to be connected. And so that's when I started to learn that I really needed to experience this most directly. And I was very inspired by the work of heart math, because this gave me a really strong basic understanding of how the energetic heart works. And so this is based in science. So this helped me a lot to accept it. And what heart math says is that emanating from each and every one of our physical hearts is this electromagnetic field. And it expands and contracts around our body. And the size of that field is based on our emotional state. And so feelings like love, joy, and happiness create a very large, magnanimous sort of electromagnetic field, whereas feelings of sadness or grief or anger or greed, those kind of feelings create a more constricted electromagnetic field. But what's really fascinating to me, first of all, everyone thinks the brain is running the body, and of course that's true, but the brain also has an electromagnetic field. What's interesting to me is that the heart's electromagnetic field is much bigger than the brain's. And so the electric part of that field in the heart is 60 times greater than the brain. But the magnetic part of that field is 3,000 times bigger than the brain. So this is the most powerful energetic field in our bodies emanates from our heart. And heart math has found that the heart actually sends more information to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. And this is really interesting because it seems that that electromagnetic field is picking up information out in the world as it expands and contracts, brings it back to the body into the heart. We don't have a linguistic center in the heart. That information gets somehow sent to the brain, and we start to assign stories and emotions to those feelings. And so this is how it works. And so as this field is expanding, it affects the people around us. And that is what's most fascinating to me. They've done experiments where people who are doing what HeartMath calls a coherence technique, they are able to affect people sitting across from them. They affect their heart rate variability and their brainwave state. So this coherence technique at its most basic is generating feelings of gratitude in the heart. Now, these aren't thoughts of gratitude. That's very easy to think of things we're grateful for, but this is generating a feeling of gratitude. And I didn't know how to do this at first. It was very challenging. Turns out all of the emotional traumas I'd had throughout my life, while not severe like many people have experienced, they were more moderate, typical kinds of traumas. I had shut down my heart. And I think many of us do this. And so it was hard to kind of reinvigorate it. And the advice that I got was to think of things that made you happy in the past. Think of things that made you grateful in the past. And in my case, the little magic moment was a memory when I was 6 years old and my mother had taken in a stray dog who proceeded to give birth to puppies underneath my bed. And so my mom may have thought it was just a big mess. I thought it was this beautiful, magical moment, and bonding with those beautiful, squiggly, happy little puppies. And I was the only one that the dog would let be with those puppies. That was magic to me. That was the memory, and memories of other dogs that I had loved throughout my life is what really allowed me to find that. And as I practiced doing this out in the world, I found many ways to activate it. So once I was on my way home from work and I saw this homeless man standing on the corner. And I lived in Baltimore at the time. There were often these homeless people standing on the corner, and we all, many of us had just kind of become immune to it. We would just drive by, kind of ignore them. And one day there was a different person, and he was a little younger. He had blonde, fuzzy hair, and he reminded me of someone I had known in my teenage years. And I thought, I'm going to give this man some money. And so the light turned red. I pulled out my wallet. I'm looking through. I had all the denominations up to 20, you know, 1s, 5s, 10s, 20s, and what should I give him? And something prompted me to give him a $20 bill. He held that $20 bill in two hands and looked at me before the light turned green and said, "Oh my gosh, thank you. Now I can go get something to eat." And I heard his words, but I felt his gratitude, and it was the most amazing feeling. I don't know how to describe it, except I like to use the analogy from that Dr. Seuss book and now movie, the Grinch that stole Christmas. After he stole all the toys from all the people in Whoville, he decided to return them. And when he did that, he felt his heart grow 3 sizes that day. And that's exactly what I felt as I drove home on my commute. This beautiful bubble of love. I had connected my electromagnetic field of the heart with this gentleman's heart field. And I would not have known that's what was happening. I may not have really felt what I was feeling without having practiced generating those feelings in myself very consciously. And so this can be a beautiful way for us to just learn how to generate love inside of ourselves. And so when we speak about these hardships, you know, lots of times people will say, you know, you can sit there and feel love, but that's not going to solve the world's problems. And of course, it's not going to alone, but we can bring that love to our hardships. When we can bring that love to solutions that we're trying to find for particular problems, bringing that love to any situation in life is so important. It empowers us and it makes challenges more surmountable. So as Eben was saying, many times these challenges are really serving as important lessons. So many, you know, I like to talk about how hurricane coverage on the news is so devastating. We get the big buildup and you know, the news people are, oh, here comes the wind. And then we watch as all of these homes get destroyed and some people lose their lives, their livelihood, their homes. So tragic. And yet in the aftermath of that, so many heartwarming stories start to come forth of people helping each other. Neighbors who maybe never spoke to each other before are now helping each other in ways they never would have imagined. And that's when we really start to feel that connection to our fellow humans. Of course, this COVID coronavirus crisis that we're in right now, we're really feeling that connection to everyone and how all of this is so poignant. And Eben and I like to think that there's a bigger picture going on really in any hardship, even this collective one that we're experiencing now. And so later on, we can often see those lessons, but in the midst of that hardship is very challenging to see. And it's not like we need to figure all that out in the midst of that hardship. The important thing is to allow ourselves to experience it, go through it, feel what's going on, and learn from those lessons. Of course, death of a loved one is one of the most challenging things any of us can face, especially someone we're incredibly close to. And so in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, there's a story we tell about a woman who had lost her fiance, and she was terribly, terribly grief-stricken over all of this because he had been the love of her life. They had known each other for only a year, but this beautiful instant connection. And he died one day in a car accident right before they were supposed to get married. And she thought, what an injustice in this world. How could this man have possibly been taken away from me? And so she was very stuck in this grief. And one of the things that she tried to do to sort of get through all of this was that she consulted with a hypnotherapist who then regressed her back into, what was really going on from a higher perspective. And what she learned was that she did have a soul connection with this fiance, and that she hadn't necessarily been able to be with him on earth, while incarnated into a physical body very often through her times on earth. And so what she realized, what she learned through that session is that, oh my God, I had the gift of spending 1 year with the love of my life. If I had never gotten that experience, I never would have known what love really was. And then what it really was when that person was taken from me. And so she learned that she could still have this soul connection. In fact, that soul connection was eternal. And they had known each other before they had even met in these physical bodies. And that is what contributed to that amazing soul connection that they had. And many of us are very familiar with when we might meet a new person and they seem kind of familiar, like we've known them before, and yet we can't really put our finger on it. I know Eben and I, we absolutely had that experience when we first met. It was like we already knew each other. And so this really speaks to that eternity of soul and the binding force of love that connects us all. It doesn't go away at the death of the physical body, as many, many souls who have lost their loved ones know from firsthand experience. And so that love is that poignant thing that all of us just really feel in these hardship moments. And yet when we're going through our daily lives, we don't notice this that much. We don't notice that love is the most important thing because we're worried about paying our bills and getting to our job on time and getting daycare for our children and all of the many things that we spend our days doing. And so we like to remind people before they get into those hardship situations, and even those who are well past them, to bring that love into their daily lives. And that is something that we'll do in just a moment together. But first, Eben is going to speak a little more about this topic.
Yeah, especially in this time of the COVID crisis and pandemic and all the death going on around us, all the kind of suffering in hospitals. It reminds us our culture has great discomfort around death. And I think a lot of that, from my point of view, comes from the lead taken by our materialist science over several centuries, trying to pretend that it understood the way things were, and the notion of physicalism, that only the physical world exists. It's a scientific viewpoint that is rapidly being dismissed as false. Especially in the era of quantum physics. And I don't want to go into all of that now, but I can promise you that deep within the mystery of quantum physics is all the evidence that we have free will and that our consciousness is not something that ends with bodily death. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of information there. Again, it leads to this kind of scientific notion, as I said earlier, of the one mind. And for people who want to learn a lot more about that, I can highly recommend a book by a friend of ours, Dr. Larry Dossey. It's called One Mind. And he wrote it because he's an identical twin. So he had a lot of telepathic experiences with his twin. There's another book by Guy Leon Playfair called Twin Telepathy, which is a large scientific study of telepathy in twins. But really, telepathy is just one of the first lines of evidence that our consciousness is not created by the brain and limited to our little notion of bodily self. And it's an important concept. But with all of the kind of death going on around us, it's important to kind of reassess our relationship with this. And that, of course, is something that comes up especially in this discussion, as I said, of the one mind, of consciousness. The brain is a filter of reincarnation, of our souls coming back again and again. It's important to point out that this notion of reincarnation, supported by scientific study, is not really the same as, for example, what you might find in certain religious traditions, where the goal is to get off of a cycle of reincarnation, for whatever reason, that's the goal of all. Whereas, in fact, I would say that this modern interpretation is one where we really see the growth that our souls go through in progressive lifetimes. And it often involves the same souls reshuffled in our soul group, although we can shift roles. And of course, our soul does not have a gender. So although I'm a male in this incarnation, I could easily be a female in another incarnation. And I also have heard enough stories from enough people about all of this to realize that we often switch roles too. So in one lifetime, I might be the parent to a child, and in another lifetime, that child would be a parent to me. But it's always in this progression of growth, of learning and understanding, teaching, growing together. But the thing that was so clear to me from my journey, from my coma journey, and it's become even clearer over the 11 years of scientific study of consciousness since that time, is that I believe the reason the entire universe exists is for the relationships between sentient beings, for them to manifest certain behaviors and to learn certain lessons in life. And I think most fundamentally, the lesson that energizes our growth and our ascendance as souls and all of the human spirit is really that one of love and kindness and compassion and connectedness, and when necessary, forgiveness. And I came to realize that, in fact, most of the problems in this world were because we didn't even love ourselves enough. We think loving the neighbor and loving the enemy is hard. Well, we need to start by loving ourselves, because we can't possibly love others without doing that. And especially when you get into deep soul work, and that includes what you face when you're addressing the loss of a loved one, especially the loss of a child, is trying to recover a love for self. Because we can get so depressed in the misery of that situation, especially if we buy into the materialist paradigm and believe that, death of the brain and body is the end of the soul. But no, that's not true. That's not what the current evidence suggests. And I think this is an important lesson for us all to learn. One of the amazing things that I saw early on, I've already mentioned how I got into sharing my story publicly, mainly because I realized the value that it brought to some of our local families who had lost children. But I want to point out something else. An interesting observation about all that was the more of those kind of stories I heard, the more I heard that the child who had left the world prematurely, in many ways, was the strong soul that really held the family together. And as the families would tell me their story, no matter where they were in their stages of grief over this loss of a child, they seemed to portray that child as being the real strong one. And to me, the more I've learned about reincarnation and about soul journeys and about how we help each other in this loving growth of souls towards oneness with the divine, it's realizing the beauty of that. That people would basically tell me a story that acknowledged the strength of that little soul who had left the world too early, that in fact they were seeing as kind of a parenting soul there to teach them a lesson. And I think that is a very important thing, because trying to face up to the tragedy of losing a child, can be extremely daunting, and I can imagine very insurmountable unless one is able to grow through the experience. And often, as I've heard from so many others about near-death experiences and about their deathbed visions and about their experience with losing a loved one, is I know that for a while people would tell me after my talks, and I've spoken to more than 500 groups, more than 140,000 audience members over time. But the good news is I get to hear from them too. I get their stories. And those stories are absolutely beautiful. But one that I would often hear, in fact, it was one of the most common I ever heard, was people would tell me that the greatest gift that they received from a loved one who had left this world was some message, either during the time of passage or thereafter, that assured them without question of the reality of that loved one's soul still existing and still being in communication with them. It turns out that if you look at all the different manner of ways that people can come to realize the reality of the spiritual world beyond the physical in our culture, one of the most common ways is through these kinds of after-death communications. Something like 60% of Americans, by certain polls, have had a fairly strong after-death communication that, once they have that, they really don't need any other evidence one way or the other. It's plenty to convince them of the reality of the ongoing nature of that loved one. Sometimes people need to be awakened to this possibility, but once they are, they have dreams, or they'll have sensations during the day, hear the voice, a certain smell, what have you, that reminds them that their loved one is right there. And often those messages can be very important in the now. One example I would give is a good friend of ours, Dr. Larry Burke, wrote a book, How Your Dreams Can Save Your Life. And this is about breast cancer patients. And he had more than 40 women with breast cancer who were subjects of that book. And the particular focus of the book is that all of these women had had premonitory dreams. And in most of those dreams, it was a loved one who had left the physical plane who came to tell them that they should go to the doctor, that they needed to have a mammogram, or whatever the message was that came in a dream or some other fashion, but it came from a loved one who had left the physical world. And so what that tells me is this goes way beyond evidence needed to say this is not just, wishful thinking. But when the loved one is actually giving you useful medical and health information, that is very strong evidence that, of course, their soul is really there and is really loving you and sharing that information with you. So I think all these different manner of kind of communications and understanding reports, there's plenty of that at that UVA-DOPS.org website, because they study all manner of non-local consciousness, not just reincarnation, past life memories in children, but telepathy, psychokinesis, all the many examples that mind is not created by the physical brain. So I would highly encourage people to look at that website and learn more about their work, or Jim Tucker's books are just very, very interesting. Fascinating, really. In fact, I often, in many talks that I give on these kind of topics, and many of them are to scientific and medical groups, I've been saying since early 2018 that by the year 2028, I don't believe that any self-respecting, scientifically minded, and well-read person on Earth will doubt the reality, not just of the afterlife, but of reincarnation. And it's due to the overwhelming evidence that we have. And that certainly includes a large number of people who have had communications with loved ones who have left the physical plane. And that absolutely includes people who have lost children, who have then had some communication, either in a dream or through whatever other means, through a psychic medium, that their loved one is still there. And I think the important point I would like to make about that last issue, the psychic medium, is to point out, before my coma as a card-toting materialist neuroscientist, I would scoff at the idea of a psychic medium, but I now know from encounters with mediums on my own that they're absolutely real. And in fact, the Windbridge Institute, windbridge.org, has done tremendous work. We talk about that in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe. but they have come up with a quintuply blinded protocol to assess psychic mediums, and they have more than 20 now that they've validated, who are very reliable in their ability to convey messages from other realms. But I think with that, what I would like to do is get to the very best part of all of this, because meditation, going within, is an extremely powerful way to connect with our loved ones who have left the physical plane. And so without further ado, I would like to stress, I use sacred acoustics on a very regular basis, hour to a day. A lot of that is work that I do to refresh and invigorate my relationships with that God force and with all the entities that I first discovered my NDE. But Karen is the master at teaching people how to use these tones. And so let's proceed with a meditation.
Okay, thank you. So if we were doing this live, we would have played a special recording, a sacred acoustics recording, while I spoke this meditation that I'll do in a moment. And those sounds are contain brainwave entrainment technology that help people kind of get into those calmer states of awareness more easily, especially if you're kind of agitated. They can really help to calm people down. And for me, I use these kinds of sounds to help quiet my mind when I was learning how to meditate. And people sometimes use them for focus or sleep, all kinds of things. Others do more exotic things like try to induce out-of-body experiences or connect with the souls of departed loved ones. That is a common thing that people do. And how we recommend people do that is to feel the feeling of what it was like to be with your loved one, not the thoughts. Some people say, should I conjure up what they look like? And sure, you can do that, but the more important and more effective technique in our understanding is that feeling that you feel, that binding force of love. And of course, if you're very much in the depths of grief, is not probably the time to do that. You need to go through a certain process, but at some point that can be a very effective way to make contact with your loved one in a way that doesn't involve the physical body. So what I want to take this opportunity to do now is do a guided meditation without our sound. After we do it, I'll tell you a little bit more about how you can learn more. But we call this the United Souls of Earth. And it really, I was inspired to modify our normal heart center exercise a little bit because of the COVID crisis that we're in right now, and because so many people are going through the same hardship at once. We call this a collective gift of desperation, where all of us, the entire race of humans, is going through this experience in one way or another. No one is unaffected. So this really is a global opportunity for us to learn. And so the global community only learns as each individual learns. And so each of us is responsible for bringing our energy to this one mind or one heart consciousness in our unique fashion. And so we're going to do this here and now. And so I invite you to close your eyes and bring your attention to this moment, here and now, calm and relaxed. Become aware of your breath as it moves in and out. As you breathe in, silently say, let. As you breathe out, silently say, go. Let go. Quiet the mind. If your thoughts wander, gently bring your attention back to the breath and say to yourself, let go. Now, move your awareness to your heart center and generate a feeling of gratitude, trust, and allowing. Now, imagine your breath is moving in and out of your heart. As you exhale, imagine your breath is filling up a bubble surrounding your entire body. As you inhale, imagine your breath is coming from all points of this bubble into your heart. Continue breathing this way. Now, from your heart center, move your awareness to below your body, down, down, all the way into the center of the earth. Feel your strong and stable connection to the earth. As you continue to breathe, imagine your exhale is filling up the entire earth. Imagine your inhale is coming back to you from all points of the earth. Continue breathing this way. Now, move your awareness from the center of the earth back into your body and into the heart. Using your breath, feel your heart expand to encompass all souls in your surrounding area. All souls in your entire town. All souls in your entire country. All souls from Earth who have left this physical world. All souls in challenging situations around the globe. All souls on Earth united as one. One consciousness. One mind, one heart. All souls on earth join together through the binding force of love. All souls, alive or deceased, feel your heart expand to encompass the united souls of earth and beyond. Now, return from your experience and remember that love, remember that connection to our fellow souls. Whether we know them in person or not, all souls on earth are connected, and we can feel that and experience that. Now, this is an exercise I do on a regular daily basis. This breathing in and out of my heart, feeling like I'm filling up that bubble around my body, makes me more conscious of that electromagnetic field. And it makes me more conscious of how whatever is in my heart field is actually radiating around the world, around the surrounding my body to the people around me. And so this is how we can bring love to the world, by generating it in our own selves. And the way the heart works naturally, we all have one of these, is to radiate that love to those around us. And so I call this the ultimate golden rule, where we love others like we love ourselves. We love ourselves like we would love others. And it's really the same thing. And so that's a beautiful way to think about how our hearts work on a regular basis. Now, Eben and I, because of the COVID crisis and having so many of our events canceled, much more than just this one, we decided to begin a series of twice monthly, every other Thursday webinars that we call United in Hope and Healing. And at this webinar, at the end, we do this exercise, and hundreds of people from around the world have been connecting with us live, and thousands have connected with us through the replay. And many of them are leaving their comments and sharing their experiences and feeling that connection with their fellow souls. And so we invite anyone at all, you and anyone else you would like to invite, to United in Healing.com. Sorry, I'm in this like little love bubble. I lost my words. Healing.com. And an initiative that we began last week, we've decided to invite some of our colleagues that we may have been with out in these teaching opportunities to join us in these webinars. But last week we started an initiative that we call 11 a.m. Love. And this is where everyone, wherever you live in your time zone, at 11 a.m. in the morning, go and feel that love in your heart and imagine it radiating to the world. Now, while this is taking place, so many of us, when we try to feel that gratitude, when we're in the midst of a hardship, it's very challenging. So all those first responders, people who are, dealing with issues that have nothing to do with COVID, but are affected somehow because they can't manage them in a way they would have before. Anyone who is in need, anyone who's not feeling a strong and stable connection to the earth, in that 11 a.m. moment, imagine yourself receiving that love from all the other humans on earth who are broadcasting it in that moment. And Eben and I, we haven't been necessarily remembering every day at 11 a.m., but when we remember a little later in the day, we think, where is it 11 a.m. right now? And we join with those souls. And so really what this can do is create this wave of love around the globe. And so we call that 11 a.m. Love, and you can learn a lot more about that at United in Hope and Healing, where we also have programs for personal development available, all online and self-paced, so you can join at any time. And so we've been very pleased to join you all. I enjoyed that meditation very much. And we can feel each other even though we're not physically present. And Eben, I think, has a few closing statements before we end.
Yes, and I was just going to clarify. So the next of the Thursday webinars is this coming Thursday, right?
It is April 23rd,
right.
Correct.
And
then this every other Thursday after that. This Thursday we have invited Pim van Lommel, who is a near-death experience researcher. He's a Dutch cardiologist who wrote a book called Consciousness Beyond Life. He'll be joining us this week. He is one of the most loving souls I have ever encountered. And so we really want to bring that visceral love to the event and make people really understand we can feel it.
And the other thing I'd like to just add, some people, whenever I've discussed reincarnation, they get concerned, what if my loved one reincarnates before I get there? And what I can tell you is my understanding is that doesn't happen at all, because as I said earlier, the most important thing are our relationships. I believe the whole universe exists to support sentient beings and their relationships, and that's kind of the prime driver. Because our loved ones are the most important thing, that there would never be a circumstance where, the time flow and causality would allow them not to be present when we leave the physical world, to be welcome there. So reincarnation never trips that up at all. I'd like to thank you all for joining us tonight. I certainly hope we've brought some peace and understanding to you. For us, it's a real joy to share, and we're still quite disappointed we didn't get to meet you all in person down in Charleston. We were looking forward to that, but maybe next time. But for now, what I'd like to remind you of is there is a tremendous ocean of love that welcomes all of us when we leave the physical realm and return to the spiritual realm. And that's something that we can come to know more fully through prayer and meditation while we're in these physical bodies. So I would just like to give you my best wishes on your journey for learning and teaching and discovering strength especially strength in some of the hardships and difficulties in your lives, and know that we love you. You're in our prayers, and I would simply like to say namaste.
Namaste.
The divinity in me acknowledges and honors the divinity in you. Thank you all very much for joining us and for having us on.
Thank you.
Thank you both. You have just made my whole month, I think. This was one of the most amazing presentations, and I know that everyone appreciates it so much. I just want to let everybody possibly unmute themselves, or maybe Brian can, to say thank you as everyone's leaving.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Was
Thank
really
you.
a wonderful presentation.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ordered your
Thank you
book.
all so
Oh,
much.